This is a tutorial video on the Yamaha MG24 or 32/14FX mixing console. So a couple of months ago I uploaded a tutorial video I made on these consoles. While that video has been doing great, all thanks to you, I've gotten some comments requesting that I touch on the back panel. Let's get right into it. The first set of inputs here are the mono input channels. We have 16 for this console, the MG24/14FX, and we have 24 for the MG32/14FX. Each of the mono channels have two input connectors. Input A is a female XLR connector, while input B is a female quarter range TROS. Now both of these connectors have the same level of priority as far as this console is concerned. They can both accept balanced and unbalanced signals. They can both accept line level and mic level signals because they are connected, both of them are connected to the microphone preamp or gain circuit in this console, and then they can both give out 48-volt phantom power. Really, the only difference between them is the type of connector that has been used. Now it's also worth mentioning that both of these connectors are somehow connected internally in parallel. Now, so if it comes down to it, you can actually use these connectors to split an audio signal. Now what I mean is that you can plug an audio signal to any of this connector, and while you're processing the signal as you normally would with the mixing console, you can use the other connector that is free to actually split the audio signal and send it to another source. I actually don't know if this is good audio engineering practice, but it actually works. Let me actually demonstrate it for you.
So the words come second when it's all about the flow. I know I'm not the first, so that's why kid to try to rhyme. But let me marinate, I'm with time. The road is deep, but
now, while these connectors can be used to split an audio signal, you should not use them to combine audio signals. That is, connecting audio signals from two sources to the two connectors on a channel, because if you do, you just get a terrible mix of both signals. If you want to combine an audio signal, then you should use different channels in your console. Also, each of the mono input channels have insert IO points. Now these are used to add external processing like compressors and gates to each of the individual channels. Now how this works is that audio signal comes to the channel through either of these input ports, and then it goes through the pad and gain circuit, through the high pass filter and the EQ section of the channel strip. And then if you have the insert cable plugged in here, the signal goes from this insert point to the external processor and then comes back through this same connector and then goes to the fader and to your outputs. And moving on from the mono input channels, we have the stereo input channels here. These mixers come with 4 pairs of stereo channels. For this particular console, we have 17/18 as one pair, 19/20 as another pair, 21/22 as the third pair, and 23/24 as the fourth pair. For the MG32/14FX, you have 25/26, 27/28, 29/30, and 31/32. Now the stereo channels are almost identical with a few subtle differences between them. So for explanation purposes, I will split them into 2 sets. I will call these first 2 pairs of stereo channels the first set, and these second 2 pairs the second set. Now these stereo channels, they only accept line level signals. There are no mic preamp built into them, but they can also accept balanced and unbalanced connections. Now there are 2 differences between these 2 sets of stereo channels that I'll talk about right now. The first difference is pretty obvious, being that the second set of stereo channels have additional connectors, which are RCA connectors. The first set, which is 17/18 here and 19/20, they don't have RCA connectors. That's the first difference. The second difference has to do with the way you connect these stereo channels. Now the first set of stereo channels here, which has to do with these 2 pairs of connectors, they can be used as mono channels. What I mean is this: if your mono channels are exhausted, you can still connect a mono line level signal to either of these 2 pairs of stereo channels. If you connect any input to the left of either of these stereo channels and then the console doesn't detect anything connected at the right connector, it basically treats the signal that is connected here as a mono signal. So it sends the signal to both the left and the right of the channel, and so you can use the balance knob like you would normally use pan knob in a mono channel. For the second set of stereo channels, however, you can't use them as mono channels like you would the first set. So if you plug a line level signal, mono signal, to let's say the left of this input, for example, and then you connect from the right main output to your speaker, you won't get that signal because it doesn't treat it as a mono channel and can't send that signal from left to right. So for you to have any signal from this stereo input to the right of main speaker, you have to actually plug the right of the stereo input to this connector. So both of the connectors have to use for you to get the signal from this channel to both left and right. And finally, on stereo channels, the second set of stereo channels having the RCA connector. The RCA connectors are priority. The console gives them more priority rather than the quarter range TRS. So if you plug an audio signal to this channel, for example, using the quarter range TRS, and then you plug another signal to this same channel using the RCA connectors, the signal here using the quarter range TRS gets attenuated in the console and then lets the signal at the RCA connectors to go through. So I think it's worth mentioning and you should take note when you're making this kind of connections. Moving on from the stereo input channels, we have two returns. Returns are used to send the output of external effect processors to the mixing console. So technically, returns are inputs to the mixer, and returns work with line level signals. And so we have quarter range TRS connectors as its input connector. We have left and right, the same thing for return 1 and return 2. Moving on, we have two-track input. Two-track input uses RCA connectors, and it's also an input to the console. You connect basically CD players or consumer electronics using RCA to the mixer with this two-track input. So if you don't want to use the stereo input channel, this RCA input of the stereo, you can use the two-track input. But however, it has limitations as far as this console is concerned, because you only have one level control. You can't do any EQ on the two-track input, and you also have limitations when it comes to routing. The two-track input gets automatically routed to the main output. You can't route it to any other output in the console, so you have to take note of that. And then we have record out. Record out is an output of the console using RCA connector. It's also limited in that there are no level controls. You can't control the level, no controls for the level of what is coming out here. Now let's check out the output session. The first set of output connectors we'll be looking at are the auxiliary outputs. These consoles have 6 auxiliaries and 2 effects buses. So we have connectors for aux1, aux2, aux3 and aux4 here. We have aux5, aux6, effects 1 and effects 2. They all use the quarter range TRS as their connectors. These are the output connectors for them. Then moving on, we have the group out. This console has 4 group buses, groups 1, 2, 3 and 4, and these are the output connectors for them. Just like the auxiliary outputs, they also use quarter range TRS jacks. Now, one very good thing about this console is that the group outs have insert patch points to them. This works the way the insert IO ports work for the mono channels. So if you want to add an external processor to a group of input that has been a set of input that has been grouped together, you can actually use the group inserts in each of the group buses. The way this works is that the signals that has been grouped together, they go from the channel strip all the way to the group, and if you're using the group insert, the signal comes from the channel strip to the group insert and out to the external processor, comes back using these same ports before it comes to the group output connector. Pretty impressive stuff, right? Now, these are the main left and right outputs for this console, labeled ST out. This is the main left output and this is the main right output. Now, the main output together with the mono output are the only output connectors that uses XLR. These consoles also have insert patch points for the main outputs, and so like you would do with the group insert and the insert IO in the mono input channels, you can also add external processing to the main output, and I think I really like the fact that it comes with this. Now, the final connectors we have here, this is stereo sub out. The signal that comes from this output connector, this TRS connector here, is the exact same signal that comes from this stereo out, this main output, but the level controls are different. The level control for the main output is the main output fader, while the level control for this ST sub out is in the console, the output section of the console, but it uses a knob. And finally, we have a foot switch here for effects 2. It works with the tap switch for effects 2. Finally, we have the IEC connector and the power switch. Now before I end this video, I would like to talk about these level meters. Apparently I forgot to talk about them in the first tutorial video for these consoles. Now these level meters here, the first two shows the level of the signal in the main output bus. So if I turn the master fader here, we should be able to see the level of signal in the main output bus. This second one here that says PFL AFL, it shows the level of signal coming into the console or going out when you press either the PFL or the AFL button. So if you're setting gain for your console, for example, for your inputs rather, and you press the PFL button, you should be able to see the signal level here to enable you to set the gain properly. Or if you want to monitor the output, the signal level in any of your output, let's say auxiliary or the main output, you should be able to press the AFL button and see it here. So if I press this AFL button, for example, I should be able to see the signal level here. Now this button switches what we see here to the level of signals in each of the group buses. So this is for group 1, group 2, group 3 and group 4. So when I press this now and increase, I've assigned these signals to group 2 and 3. So if I take up group 2 and 3 here, I should be able to see level of signals here for group 2 and for group 3. And when I bring it back, it shows me the level of signal for my main output and for the PFL AFL bus. Click this video to see the first tutorial I did on these consoles, where I covered everything from the knobs to the faders. And while you're at it, please hit the subscribe button as well. I'm Kelvin, thank you for seeing this video. I'll see you in the next one.